I hope that answers the question of what is Zionism. The second question of Al-Khalai. So there was a certain longing of religious Jews to go to Palestine, to go to the Holy Land and live there. And that's a certain yearning which a lot of Jews had. Most Jews chose not to carry it out. But in the last few centuries, there was a very strong pull but from a lot of Jews to go and live there. Many Jews did come there. Not a majority of Jews, maybe less than a few percent. But a certain percentage went there and they practiced Judaism there, and they got along for the most part with the Arabs. Sometimes actually there were massacres committed against them by the Palestinians, but by and large they got along pretty well there. I mean, more or less.
I think, it's very interesting that Rabbi Al-Khalai got the idea to form the Zionist movement from the Serbian people fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire and to liberate and to have country.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I didn't know about that.
It's a spiritual idea from the Serbian people, in fact.
Yeah.
And Theodor Herzl is just how we say, political operative. We go to the Turkish Khalifa and ask him to sell the Palestine. He didn't want and make the coup and kill the Khalifa. I mean,
well,
Turkish.
Are you trying to suggest that we Serbs are original Zionists?
In fact, even more.
Oh, wow.
We are, in fact, the original.
Maybe we are chosen. We are chosen, right? I think the Jewish people they have a history which is very deep and rich, and I'm pretty sure in their history in the last at least 2,500 years they have many desires to have either state or get together or some progressive ideas where they're gonna benefit with the people they live with. Will benefit too. So in comparison with us, they have a much deeper perspective. So it was a third. There was a third.
No, actually, you are right to a large degree, because it seems that they did get a very strong nationalist inclination from the Serbs, because the European Jews were living here, the Serbian Jews. That's quite possible. But at the same time, there was a tendency of religious Jews to come to Palestine, but they didn't have the plan to create a state necessarily. These are two different things. The state was a modern creation of the 18th,
yes,
19th
but
century.
how to explain? I think I don't have the English word for that. It's our people is like nation creation people.
Incubator.
Yes. How you say that? We are.
You inspire other countries.
Incubators are not.
Incubator.
No. Our.
This
have a
is
state,
so funny.
From Asia, we always have a state. Always have a state in history. Always.
I think there's a lot of. I think you're right. I think there's a lot to research there that has not been researched, and I think it's a good topic. I think not enough was written about it, so I think it's a very good area to research.
But we know. I mean, in the 6-Day War, the general who conquered Jerusalem. What is his name and where he originated?
Moshe Dayan.
No, Moshe Dayan is
Yitzhak Rabin?
under command of this general.
Yitzhak Rabin. Montagor.
No.
Oh.
Interesting. It's a GNA general, Dado Elazar.
Ah,
Lead the
yes.
operation.
He was from
He's from
Yugoslavia.
Serbia, from Zagreb,
Yeah.
and he's Serbian. And it's very interesting fact in that 6-Day War that Arabs listened the army, the central of the Jewish army, and they heard a strange unknown language that they speaking in the military commanders. And interesting, which language is that language they speak?
Serbian.
Sure. I mean, just want to tell.
It could be the secret language.
Just want to tell
The
how
Zionists.
they get interesting.
Well, now I feel privileged. All right, that's very valuable information. I never heard about that. That's amazing. I used to know some Al-Khalai guy, a lawyer from.
We are here in Zemun. We know each other.
From Zemun, a very good lawyer actually. I didn't know he's related to one of the ideologists of Zionism. But that. Well, there are different dimensions, right?
In many different dimensions.
Yeah.
That's why it's such a complicated issue.
Yeah,
This is the
well, we
major
could
Like for
spend-
some people going to the Holy Land, we could spend 24 hours.
Sure,
there.
yeah. We could
Here's
spend
the,
months.
Here's the ideological root and spiritual root is here.
I think it's quite possible. I think it's, but I think it's very possible that the the Zionists were more, they were trying very hard to be like, they had this inferiority complex, and they were trying to be like Western European. So I think many, possibly they marketed the idea of like Vienna or Zurich being the birthplace of the Jewish people in Palestine, but it was actually Serbia,
hidden.
Belgrade. It's quite possible.
It's hidden, and no one will know, but it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
I will tell you how I call the city and the city where I live. I call it Bel Salim and Zemuno Salim, just to explain you the where we live, in fact.
Have you been?
Zemlju Salim, huh?
Yeah.
Did you ever travel to the Middle East?
No, only in spirit. not
But
by foot.
there was a very big Jewish and Greek community in this city like a long time ago, right?
And Jews is always expelled from the empires.
Yeah, yeah.
From the West empires, like Austro-Hungarian, they expelled and they
You just
go
saw from
to
the
border.
Rome.
In the Turkish, they expel, they go to the border, and border is always here. We are keeping the border.
I'm talking Roman times even, you know,
Sure.
and Byzant and
Yes, but here is
like
the
there
border.
was a huge Jewish population, and somehow somebody told me, I don't know for a fact, that they feel most comfortable in Ottoman period, because the Ottomans they were fencing a trade, you know,
Sure.
so there was a lot
Yes.
of trade going on
Yes, this.
Yes.
with Jewish,
Yes.
because the Ottomans also accepted Jewish
here is the-
people being
here is the
expelled
border.
from Holland, France,
Yes,
you
exactly.
know, like England,
Spain.
Spain, especially with the
Yeah.
Reconquista, right?
Yeah.
So they were moving,
Alhambra.
you know, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And you had the last question. Okay, so just to answer your question was about the left and the Zionist left.
Because I have heard that basically a lot of Jews who were Marxists, if we remember like Frankfurt School, for example, right, of social relations, right, they were actually anti-Semitic because, you know, like, I mean, I have heard this.
Well, Hannah Arendt and a few others wrote in '48 a letter speaking out very strongly against Menachem Begin, who was later the prime minister, who from the right side of Zionism, who visited New York saying he was a fascist. And Hannah Arendt herself wrote that the whole idea of creating a Jewish state in Palestine is a very bad idea.
Yeah, but
because-
Hannah is a right-wing philosopher.
Okay, so from who? From the Frankfurt School.
I mean, I don't remember now the names, but I think even there was this conversation with him, Walter Benjamin, and some other. So.
And what did Walter Benjamin think about
No,
that?
it's okay. I can't check this source of this like point, but I have heard from my professor, who is professor trained at the University of Chicago, and actually we had a class about Benjamin in settings of Chicago, like Jewish Cultural Institute, right? So he said this publicly, right?
So what is the question then? Your quoted your question.
So I have this, you know, this idea from my professor that, you know, like a lot of Marxist Jewish were like actually in fact anti-Semitic, not.
Anti-Semitic in what way? How would you?
I mean, they didn't like right-wing Jews.
But that's no, but not liking right-wing Jews is not anti-Semitism.
That's not anti-Semitism.
It's
yeah.
a political perspective.
Okay, I need to check my source
Well,
because it's just
may I tell you, Walter Benjamin is not the finest example to study the Zionist motivation, because that guy was romantic. He was genius.
Yeah.
He was like a prey. They were chasing him in every country. He was on the end. He committed a suicide on the border of France and waiting for asylum in Spain. You know, so he never made it. You know, because they were chasing him. He was so superior as intellectual and, you know, visionary that, you know, like the governments who were collaborating with the Hitler and the Nazis didn't want him around. So his motivations were romantic, to go in some country where he should feel safe, number one, and then he can exercise his intelligence, education, and everything else. You know, because he was like a prey. And I understand why he was sympathizing Zionist movement, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say Zionism has a certain double-edged sword, I guess. On the one hand, a lot of the ideas of it are very good, that the Jews should have a homeland. On the other hand, they went to a place that was already occupied by people, where people were living there and these people were expelled. So that's one of the most difficult paradoxes. Okay.
Unfortunately, history is like that.
Yeah, you're right.
We push each other, you know.
So that's my question. There's no like actually this idea that, you know, like there was Jewish Marxists who were anti-Semitic, right? So
Jewish Marxists. Well, Marx himself said that Jews like money. I mean, that's what Marx wrote, and he was Jewish. So, I mean, you're asking if there were Marxists who were Zionists who were anti-Semitic?
no, who were like actually anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. like Jewish Marxists?
Jewish Marxists. Well, actually, the whole discourse in the U.S. in general is about Israel is pretty flawed, I think, because in the U.S. a lot of professors are very strongly pro-Israel, and even those who are not, they're afraid to really say what they think. And if they do, they get into trouble. When it comes to Israel, when it comes to Zionism.
No, but actually your point is that all Jews are pro-Zionist, right?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
No. So, no, that's not my point at all.
Okay.
Some Jews are Zionists, some Jews are not.
Okay. And it doesn't depend on, say, like, actually, like, right wing or left wing, right? It's not kind of
Well, no, that's another thing. Zionism itself is a very strict form of nationalism. Within that nationalism, we have right and left. But you have a lot of Jews who are non-Zionists, and then you have some Jews who are anti-Zionists. So you have Jews involved in all of these different movements. So Jews are definitely not a unified body. There's a lot of disagreements within them, a lot more fighting than people outsiders realize, and a lot of different ideological division.
But also, sorry, one more thing. I think I asked this question, but still, I read by actually Israel Shamir, right? That basically, yeah. So it's actually this question of Soviet Union, right? That basically when Soviet policies become anti-Semitic, right? And actually, I think they just said to all Soviet Jews to leave, right? A lot of them moved from Soviet Union to Israel, right? But the thing is, what writes Israel Shamir on his books, what they encountered is differentiation, right? So basically, European Jews are more privileged, and actually, so Israel Shamir point is that Jews from Russia, right? They were treated as a third, even worse than Jews from like North Africa, right? Because they considered like kind of third-rate Jews, and they were working in the most like service job industry, right? And they were excluded completely from public sphere, right? They couldn't get any jobs in the cultural sector, in politics, right? And they were completely marginalized. So in 1970s, and like Jews from Russia, they were always like. Right. No, I mean, it's just Israel Shamir.
Do you consider Roman Abramovich a Jew from Russia?
I mean,
He doesn't work in a factory. He's on a yacht.
No, but let's speak today speak about.
Actually, there was even a billionaire who came to Israel
Just-
recently,
yeah.
and he wasn't even checked for coronavirus because he's a billionaire.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, my point is, so one just differentiation by your culture.
No,
right?
so, but you okay?
And Israel Shamir makes this point that Jews who came from Soviet Union actually were expelled, right? They had very bad attitude towards actually other Jews who were from Europe, because if you're a European Jew, you're kind of like first-rate Jew, right? At the same time, if you're Soviet or maybe Russian Jew, right, it's still like.
Okay, so
Does it make sense?
you said a whole bunch of things which I think are factually incorrect, which he says perhaps that are factually
Yeah.
incorrect.
Yeah.
The first thing is that the Soviet Union didn't expel the Jews from the Soviet Union. The Jews chose to leave the Soviet Union after the breakup. My father personally, who lived during the Soviet Union, wanted to leave because he was a Zionist, so he left, and he fought with them very hard. And eventually they kicked him out. But it's not like the Jews were expelled from the Soviet Union. Although there was anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union later on, even though the Soviet Union was supposed to solve the problem of anti-Semitism, and it made it illegal, but still there was definitely an anti-Semitism problem in the Soviet Union. Then in general, in Israel there's a certain pyramid of like hierarchy, like racial hierarchy, informal one. First is European Jews.
Yeah.
After that, Arab Jews. Then Ethiopian Jews, and then Palestinians. Or maybe.
And then what about Soviet Jews?
So Soviet Jews.
Yeah. Or post-Soviet Jews.
Okay, yeah. Soviet Jews, within post-Soviet Jews, usually what would happen is within one generation, they would already speak perfect Hebrew and lose their accent, and their children would. And they would really integrate well into society by and large. The problem is that if some of them were not Jewish, then they would become Israeli citizens if one of their grandparents was Jewish, but they would face discrimination to some degree. I would say they integrated not too badly, much better than Middle Eastern Jews. Yeah, but generally the ones who have an accent still suffer discrimination, and what usually happened was that second or third generation Israelis were very racist towards newcomers, and that's what I think happens to immigrant communities.
Yeah, Israel Shamir actually.
Because they mock people with a new accent and they want to show that.
And Israel Shamir makes a point. I know maybe he's wrong, right? He's just like provocator, right? We know it, right? As I said, right? But he makes this point basically, and this is the reason of this kind of bad attitude, at least in 70s, right? Why Soviet Jews all become very right wing, like they become all right wing, and Because you know, the just marginalization, right, and they become.
I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason they become so right wing is because they're very happy that Israel took them in, and now that's their new identity, and they embrace it wholeheartedly. And also, they come from the Soviet experience where you can't really rebel and express your opinion that much, so they don't want to rebel against the newfound state, and they want to show that they're loyal, and they just become loyal citizens. Okay, extremely loyal. So now, just to talk about the process Israel went through over the years. So we had, what happened in the 1980s was that the kibbutzim, these Israeli communes in Israel, created by Israeli labor movements, were starting to have very extreme financial difficulties. And then the government started giving them loans, but they couldn't pay back these loans. And we need to understand that the people who lived in these communes were considered like the elite of Israeli society, like the salt of the earth. That was like the ideal Zionist dream. And they were like in very high positions in the government and in the army and so on. And then basically what happened was eventually Israel, which had a pretty strong social welfare state in the 1950s and 60s, even though it had poverty, in the 80s it started becoming neoliberal. By the 90s, once Netanyahu gets elected, who was the current prime minister, who started privatizing everything, it became absolutely neoliberal. And now there's a real crisis. I mean, now there's a real ongoing economic crisis, and the cost of living is very high, as we'll get to shortly. But just the point I want to make here is that a lot of these communes or kibbutzim and agriculture co-ops that were built in strategic areas of the country privatized. And either they sold off the land for millions and they shared the profit amongst themselves, becoming millionaires overnight, or they decided to grow marijuana or other agricultural things that give them a certain edge, and they've been making a lot of money from doing this. So it's really interesting that what started off as a socialist or even communist project ended up becoming like a totally capitalist franchise. And
Sure. Sure.
Okay, so now we're getting to the question of the left parties today, and then we're going to go to the what the movements that are going on and the socioeconomic realities now. Left today, you have the Joint List. Now, the Joint List is three different Palestinian parties within the Israeli parliament. One of them belongs to the original Israeli Communist Party. A lot of very far left Israeli Jews vote for them, maybe between 6,000 to 7,000, and reportedly as many as 25,000 Arab Jews who usually voted for the right-wing parties also voted for them now.